how much did you know about this case before, I guess, this more recent media cycle? Obviously, it had some traction in 2019, after his apparent suicide, and now it's picked up some more steam with, like you're saying, Trump coming into office and him promising to be transparent as it relates to the Epstein file. So, out of curiosity, was this something that was on your radar before, coming into office, and then particularly before this most recent cycle?
Honestly, it wasn't something that I was following closely. I mean, I was aware of the investigation. I was aware that Jeffrey Epstein was a horrific person, and I knew that he actually had a lot of powerful friends, and so that was what was in the news. I always assumed that the Department of Justice was doing their investigation and that we would eventually get to the truth. And it wasn't really till the last campaign where kind of Trump and JD Vance and so many others started talking about it like constantly, that it kind of piqued more of my interest as to why they were so invested. And then, of course, when the campaign was over, and then they said they were going to release the files, and then the Attorney General Pam Bondi says, "Well, they're on my desk, and we're going to release them," and then they don't, and then completely do a complete flip flop, and then now are hiding, obviously, what's in the files. That's when I think a lot of us got really concerned about what is happening and why all of this cover up. Because what's happening right now is a cover up. It's a White House cover up to stop the release of the files. And so, yeah, I've always known about it, but certainly part of my job as the lead Democrat on oversight is to investigate. And so this is a big investigation for us.
Robert,
Yeah,
what did they release so far, and what are we still waiting for?
Well, they've released almost nothing. So to be clear, Democrats forced essentially a subpoena on the files to the committee. It's different than the effort right now in trying to get the files out to the Congress and the public, which we support, of course, through the petition process that's happening right now. So we in the committee, we got Republicans to agree to subpoena the documents. Then, obviously, the DOJ responds, says we'll be getting that to you. They put out the first batch of documents to us. There was nothing really new there. About 97% of what they put out was already in the public record. So very, very few limited new documents. We're still waiting for the Epstein files and for them to send them actually to us. They continue to stall, and we're not getting those files. We've also been working to get files from other sources, like the Epstein estate, which has a large tranche of files in their possession. And we have, for example, gotten the birthday book and note that Donald Trump said didn't exist. So that kind of crude note that he drew with a message to Jeffrey Epstein on his birthday, kind of in the shape of a woman. And so that and other documents we have forced the release, but vast majority of the documents or videos and pictures, those are still in the possession of the Department of Justice. We have not received them, even though they are legally obligated to give them to us. And so we keep pressing on it.
It's something that's been bothering me about this case a lot, and it's something that the Trump administration does with respect to any scandal that they're caught in, is the shifting of the goalposts. Originally when this story broke, that Trump had written this birthday letter to Jeffrey Epstein, it was JD Vance, it was, the press secretary saying, no, this letter doesn't exist. This letter isn't real. There's no letter. If there was a letter, why haven't they shown it to us? Like you said, the Oversight Committee releases this letter. Then it got shifted to, well, the letter might be real, but the signature isn't real. And there's also been this situation of allegedly Pam Bondi told Donald Trump that his name was mentioned in the Epstein files several times. Then she comes out and says, actually, no, his name was never mentioned. There was the minute of footage that magically disappeared, the security footage. Are there any other details that you just really question as it relates to this Epstein case?
I think first the biggest piece of this is the question as to why the White House is so obsessed with covering the files. So I think that's the biggest question on my mind. And I can assume it's because there are very powerful people that are implicated in what are in the documents or the other materials that are there. What else can we assume? What else would be the reason once they actually know the contents of what's in there coming into office to flip-flop so aggressively? I also think we have to understand that Jeffrey Epstein, according to Epstein himself, was best friends with Donald Trump for 15 years. he said this and has been quoted saying this. Jeffrey Epstein had a photo of himself and Donald Trump on his desk. We've heard this from many of the survivors and victims. We know that Jeffrey Epstein groomed and essentially would oftentimes meet these girls that were underage at Mar-a-Lago and then bring them to New York. We know that most of these crimes and the violence happened either in Epstein's apartment in New York, and there was a lot of activity happening in Palm Beach as well. And so there's just a lot of questions there as to what exactly happened, who knew what, who was involved. And what I have said to our caucus and to the public is I really could care less who the men are that cause this harm are. I don't care if they're Democrats or Republicans, if they were political figures, if they are billionaires, if they have power. Like it doesn't matter. What matters is justice for the survivors of now whom I've met many of the now women who suffered horrific trauma and sexual violence and in some cases rape. And so I think it's important for us to center those survivors and that we're doing this work to get justice for them and to remember that we shouldn't care who these people are that we expose.
Yeah, that's that last part at least is very refreshing to hear, because I feel like there have been so many efforts to politicize this, and one of the things that I have appreciated seeing is certain Republicans and certain Democrats coming out and saying, you know what, regardless of who's in these files, we need to get to the bottom of this. Whether that's Tom Massey and Ro Khanna, I don't think that I ever expected to see Marjorie Taylor Greene and AOC agreeing on anything, but there we have it with as it relates to these files. So I want to pose this question to both of you, just because I am interested in the response, since it is the conservative talking point that always gets thrown around when trying to rebuke these Democratic efforts of trying to get the Epstein files out, which is, why now? Why bring up these files now? Why try to get to the bottom of this now when presumably this could have been done under the Biden administration?
Go ahead, Robert.
Sure. Look, I think there's two things. So one is, I think that's a fair question. I've told people, if there was information, even the information that's been released now, the Biden administration should have done it. And so the same questions I have today, I would have had if President Biden was in office. I'm newer to Congress. I'm new to leading this committee. I absolutely want to know why the Biden DOJ wasn't more engaged in releasing the documents, because they should have been. And obviously, it wasn't a priority or something that the Attorney General at the time thought was important. I will add, the Department of Justice traditionally has been separate from the White House and the actions of the president. That's how it should be. Why the Department of Justice wasn't more engaged in releasing the files and putting together this case, I think is a very good question for former Attorney General Merrick Garland and others. But obviously they're not in power anymore. So I wish they would have done it. They didn't. But now Donald Trump is in power, and it's Donald Trump that centered the release of the files as a goal. And so I think they've got to now keep up to their campaign promise.
Yeah, for whatever reason, Donald Trump decided to make this like part of his campaign and something that he focused on, and I mean that's really kind of what stirred the pot, right? I mean there wasn't a lot of talk about this like during the Biden administration, right after he had supposedly committed suicide and he passed away. I think a lot of people kind of just didn't really think about it, right? Until Biden Donald Trump stirred the pot, right? And kept talking about how we're going to release the files. And that really kind of, more than anything, it riled up his base, right? The MAGA. So that's why you have like Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's why you got, Lauren Boebert, on this that signed the petition, right? Massey has signed the petition. You don't know, and I think that is a good question that needs to be answered by the people in the Biden administration, or Merrick Garland, as Robert said. But again, it just really wasn't something that was talked about, during the Biden administration, right? Because, I think it was kind of forgotten, and it was really just Donald Trump who kind of stirred it up and got it going. And now it's, okay, this is what you said you're going to do, so do it.